I'm actually seeing that those small companies of hardy, resilient folks who managed with or without funding, for years, like their strategies are what other people are turning to. Like, the people who had no admin staff to fire, or, like the people who have been honing strategies for survival and resilience for generations have a lot to draw on right now.
Hello, and welcome to Art Restart, where we explore how artists are reinventing their fields and building a new landscape for the arts. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, brought to you by the Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be hearing from dancer, choreographer, and artistic director Rulan Tangen. Rulan was thriving in an international career as a performer and dancer when, in 2004, she survived a bout with stage 4 cancer. Emerging from the harrowing experience, she shifted her goals and committed herself to getting a brand new company, Dancing Earth Creations, off the ground. And 17 years later, she remains its founding artistic director. Dancing Earth is a mixed heritage company that creates contemporary dance deeply rooted and researched in the communities in which it works. Through its workshops and dances, Dancing Earth explores and links themes of ecological and social health and wellness, particularly in indigenous communities. Dancing Earth has led workshops in many native reservations, and to date, the company has included artists from 28 First Nations as co-creators. Among the many awards and recognition Rulan and Dancing Earth have received are an Expressive Arts Award from the National Museum of the American Indian and a Blade of Grass Fellowship for socially engaged art. Rulan spoke to me from her home near Santa Fe. I knew that the pandemic shutdown was devastating to Dancing Earth, as it was for all smaller performing arts companies. So I started the interview by asking her to walk me through how she's navigated the last 18 months.
Thank you so much, Piercarlo, for asking me this. And even though I think, the sort of common mundane part of the story is that we all were completely out of work, I think what the deeper question is the role of artists in society, especially when the whole thing implodes and collapses, because I do feel like artists are the visionaries, because artists are constantly being creative in challenging and changing circumstances. And so who better than artists to not only comfort the community, but also to provide spaces of imagination, either propelled by the artists or demonstrated by artists. So I take that role to heart. And I'm going to actually bring this conversation to where I had to go, like everyone else. I was without human community. And my art is, I think all performers have to engage with people, whether they like it or not. But certainly in the art that I've facilitated as the artistic director for Dancing Earth, a lot of it's community sourced. So not only the artists on stage, but it could be, farmers or elders or culture carriers or, open conversations that are facilitated. And suddenly I was without human community. And there's a lot I can say about that. But what I can say is I didn't really feel myself to be lonely. I was certainly a difference that I had to adapt and adjust to. But I had time on many days to take a walk outside, even though I was working many, many hours. I took a walk outside and I connected with the beyond human beings who have always been my teachers, so my teachers who are beyond human. And there were different, I think you could call it teachings or sharings or learnings that came from me listening during different seasons to the desert and the dried riverbed, which many look at and see, oh, it's all dead, it's all brown, it's all dried. But there's an incredible ecosystem that's very diverse, because to survive in the desert, a million living things find a million ways to survive in the desert. And of those, I think there was probably 8 different expressions that I'd love to share with you. Not necessarily what I learned, but where I learned them from, because I think some people might find it to be like poetic or metaphor, but I actually found them to be very direct. So these 8 different directions or mini seasons, what came to me. And the first one would have been in March. The first part that I learned was from the wind. It was March, and we have big, dusty winds, which I always get kind of irritated by. But
And where were you? Because
I
you live in both in the Bay Area and
good
in
question.
New
Yes,
Mexico,
I
right?
had just come back from the Bay, and I was in New Mexico at the time. I'd love to just acknowledge those as the Bay Area being stolen, occupied Ohlone territory of Yelamu, now known as San Francisco, and in New Mexico, occupied stolen Tewa lands, now known as Santa Fe. I'm not quite in Santa Fe; I'm near, but good enough for this for this for this conversation, I think. Yeah, I learned from the wind, and I get irritated by the wind, and then, of course, farmers tell me, "Oh, well, that's how pollination happens." And as that came through, I felt this, like, pollination, and there's plants that have been given the name weeds, but they really can move into life quickly, and they're very resilient, they don't need much to survive on, and gosh, I think artists can be weeds sometimes. I certainly became one because we had been getting ready. We had just done a premiere of a new production, and we were lined up for touring. Maybe the first year where we'd had that much work in about a decade, like of building relationships. And the dancers had, some of them had put 3 years of their life into creating this work. And the common business knowledge that I was actually given in little business meetings, not within my company, but out in the field, were such that, if you have no expenses, so if you don't tour, you don't have expenses. And so you just let the dancers go. They'll figure things out. And I found that to be quite inhumane. I didn't think it would, I didn't think it was fair. So what I do when I feel things are not fair, I move into double, triple timing. If you can imagine, like your feet in a very like fast staccato rhythm, that became me. And like a weed moving into flowering or the wind pushing pollination, I decided to invent a whole new business, which doesn't sound so new now, but I didn't know anything about doing classes online. In fact, the research at the time didn't even indicate that Zoom was necessarily what it would be. So that's like March 6th is where we're starting to try to figure things out. And then to have a full programming online of online dance classes, panels for Indigenous LGTB associates, another panel for Afro Indigenous artists and culture carriers, lectures by Native elders who have been the founders of the Native contemporary dance movement, really in an effort to just not only give a little, funding to keep people going, but even more so to keep their creative lives going, to keep them, fulfilling their purpose on this planet and to serve our communities.
What lessons from that experience are you planning to continue now that we're returning, at least in this country, to a semblance of normalcy?
Well, yeah, what was considered normal wasn't balanced or equitable. So, what is normal for people to be able to get to a performance isn't normal for people who have, immune compromisation or are in wheelchairs. And what's normal as far as the arts field, particularly for people of color, was never right beforehand. So, this is a chance for those. I'm actually seeing that those small companies of hardy, resilient folks who managed with or without funding, for years, like their strategies are what other people are turning to. Like, the people who had no admin staff to fire, or, like the people who have been honing strategies for survival and resilience for generations have a lot to draw on right now. So we're seeing how people who come from marginalized, under-resourced backgrounds are standing up, becoming the leaders of the new movement across the board, arts and otherwise.
So what, which is great. I mean, the scrappy, since we're using the term weeds, the scrappy weeds are the ones that survive.
Yeah, which brings me to my second teaching, which was about the dandelion. So a dandelion. So here we we're planting all these seeds, and then at a certain point, let's call it the fall, like a dandelion, things started to shift where all of that had been given to artists over perhaps years, but certainly the last few months, where they started to take on their own sovereignty, doing things on their own. They've now gained skills and confidence, perhaps with video performance, or maybe they already had those skills, but they've been, had different opportunities coming from Dancing Earth. And then there was a lot of folks have been taking on their own projects and doing that for their own communities where they are. And I think of that as something really healthy when you see people that you mentor or support even for a moment, when they become even better leaders than they were before. So I'm definitely seeing that now. I'm not so much on social media, but when I do, I'm like, oh, look what this person's doing now. Like where they're becoming not only leaders making creativity for themselves, but also for others. And that's something I'm so happy about. And when all that happens, then I move to the third teacher, which is a rock. When I look at those rocks, you realize that your sense of time and your sense of action is very, like, you just have a little slice of it. Like, I look at this smooth river rock, I'm like, it got smooth from water over a long period of time, and even what I'm holding in my hand is not inanimate. There's tons of activity that I can't even see. So for Dancing Earth, I think that took the form of appearing inactive for a period of time where there was a lot going on that was invisible to the eye, whether that was recalibrating, what we want to be in the world, or looking at our systems, because everything we had been doing a lot just kind of like fly by the seat of our pants, make it happen. And people have always said, if we just had a little bit more time to plan things out. Says, okay, I hear that I've been driving everyone to like beyond capacity, because we constantly have a lot of community members to serve. And perhaps this is the time to slow down from that and really like get better situated, ground ourselves like rocks. And next to a rock, you'll often see a branch, and that's my next teacher, the fourth teacher. So when a branch like falls from a tree, it's the water has dried out, and it takes this, like my arms right now, they're making this sort of twisted shape. And if I was to pantomime big branch to you, or here's the dance of branch, you'd see this twisted shape. And I realized that that twisted shape is actually the shape of water. So roots look like that, branches look like that. It's the movement inside of them. And even when they dry down, it's still that water shape. So even though we weren't actively producing programs, we were learning from all the work that we'd done for 17 years of like, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and using those as templates. Also in the dried riverbed that is now my big teacher, you'd see the footprints left behind of humans, of animals, and the footprints that we'd left from all the work that we had been doing meant that there were a lot of groups that were reaching out to request programming. So even though we weren't actively producing our own, there are many groups that still wanted someone to come and teach online twice a week. And so we were still doing that. But people would be like, gosh, your version of being quiet is other people's version of being busy. But, I find it very difficult to say no when people are reaching out for dance or movement, because I feel like that's really what can make us fully human, that many folks have not been able to have access to. And so people are like, oh, I don't like dance. I don't know what dance is. I'm not a dancer. But it gets down to like being in your body, being fully human. Can you be in your body and move? And from that comes dance. But for me, it's about first just being fully human in our bodies.
And so the footprints is lesson 5,
Oh,
6.
okay. Yeah. So 6. You know, when something in the arroyo falls down, let's say I'm eating something and a crumb falls down. So, what has fallen? Ants come together and they work to harvest that. And I felt like there were times when I felt like I had fallen down, and so many folks came out towards me and they were
Oh.
like, keep this going. 'Cause, I honestly was like, is dance still needed in them, or am I still needed? Like, all of these existential questions that probably every arts leader found themselves asking. And so many folks that came forward, lift up, prop it back up. Here's what you should be doing. How can I help? Like a lot of people coming forward to say, how can I help?
Did you seek and accept help in a way you hadn't before?
I did. I will say that there's a caveat in that maybe the other time where I learned this, like accepting help, seeking help, as being part of a reciprocal circle was right before Dancing Earth was founded, which was with a battle with cancer. And I had said to myself over and over, I don't want to have to learn that hard way again. But at that time, I had to ask for help. I had to receive help and really felt that reciprocity. So that did come forward again in, the winter of this year up until now, really starting to shift to reflect that community that's really actually global, that's coming forward to say, dance is still important, Dancing Earth is still important, you are still important, and that's why I'm still on the call, I guess, to speak with you.
It's so interesting that these two, if we're bringing it back to the ants, the community of the hive basically working
Mhm.
together, that
Yeah.
both of those moments occurred during moments of health crises, one which was very personal for you,
Mhm.
and the other one being a pandemic.
Yes. Any person or community or culture who's gone through extreme struggles, um, I don't know, I feel like it can also diminish the pain and suffering if you're like, "Oh, well, from you struggle, you learn, and then things get better," but, uh, I'm a survivor, a really resilient survivor, and I am looking to not be victimized, to not be like or not self-victimize. I wanna learn and grow, which involves, like, the pain of change, but, also, trying, failing, trying again. And, I think that kind of gets me to my seventh teacher. In the arroyo, you also see bones, antlers, bones. And I looked at them and I was like, this was something alive that was thundering down this arroyo, probably much more life force than I have right now. And they're still here. They're dried down to their essence. Those bones last a real, real long time. And what I did with some of those bones, I remade them into art pieces, or they were remade into art pieces by a friend, which I was dancing into life a few days ago. So I think there's a metaphor in there about it's about continuance. I'm not sure what I have to say, about like continued transformations and collaborations that are continually evolving. But looking at what seems to be done, over, dead, dried up, that it can also be beautiful and as something of essence. Certainly, the dance piece that I was called to make with the bones did feel like that to me.
So we're not talking about your message is metaphorical, but these were actual physical bones that were in your dance piece?
Yep. They were my
Oh, I
collaborators.
see.
Yep. Instead of dancers, I had bones and rocks and dried up flower. Everything I chose on stage was with the incredible multi artist named Marion Claire Wasserman. And she had taken these pieces from the desert, these dried yucca pods, these dried horsetail. There was a shell, but parts of them she did a light coating of gold. And I actually am thinking about there's a beautiful Japanese art form that I've seen and admired, which is something broken that gets put back together, like essentially glued back together with gold. I think what she found with the bones, like they were beautiful as is, but this application of gold reminds me of the performance process, which is it might be something that's everyday reality, but there's a heightened attention, there's a heightened sensibility, there's a heightened refinement of intention that you could equate to a lining of gold that catches the light.
Wow, it sounds just beautiful. I would like to take a step back, if we could, and ask you kind of a broad question, which is what would you fundamentally change in the world of dance?
I think one thing that has been very different about Dancing Earth is that well, for a long time, there wasn't admin. Like until the last few years, there really wasn't that much admin support. There'd be people coming in part time, a single person at a time, here and there. But we didn't have a team or a system because I was centering the artists and the art making. And how that plays about now when there's some part-time staffing is that I've really put my feet in the ground and said, we all get paid the same rate, whether that's the director, the grant writer, the dancer, because oftentimes what was presented to me as a really, effective business model, if I looked at it, was a pyramid structure where the people on the bottom were getting paid the least, and the people on the bottom were also the frontline workers, or one might say that the dancers, the performers, the teachers, who are also definitely the people of color, although our entire organization is BIPOC. But I think that that's a certain type of equity and justice that is, I haven't been able to see a way around. I've been told so many times that we would have a more stable company if there was a managing director who was paid much more, or if, hiring a development director at 10 times more. And I haven't been able to shift that. I haven't felt, I just felt like that didn't seem right to me.
When did you make this decision to of pay equity?
Oh, from the beginning. That's when I said,
Really?
yeah, from the beginning. And unfortunately, and this might lead me to maybe the eighth lesson, except for me, because as a founder, you put in tons of unpaid time, which when you balance that out, it becomes inequity. So the only one who was receiving inequity was me, and I'm looking at that, because that could also lead to other patterns that aren't healthy. That said, I'm already putting in my 10th hour today, but because I do have a lot of energy. I have a lot of energy that comes from creativity.
It sounds like you've had to learn some important lessons about how you want to lead also. That
So
you
that's still
can't.
emergent, yeah. But
Right.
coming out of this whole period, like I had this sort of frantic like making and then the pausing. But I'd say that pause, like you said, because it's so rare, that I would call like the underground time, the time of going into the darkness. And that was happening on many different fronts, like going into the darkness, personal, professional, financial, every different way. And someone reminded me that a cocoon is actually, it's decay, it's decomposition. It's not pretty. It's not like nice little worms squirming around and then beautiful butterflies. So
Right.
I'll,
It dissolves, it becomes this weird goop, and then it becomes a
yes,
butterfly, right? Yeah.
yeah. So I was feeling a lot of that weird goop for a lot of the early part of this year, and not really being able to stand strong in my vision or creativity because we were in emergence. And I also am very clear that no matter what we envision or discuss or plan with a little strategic plan and a little, mapping, organizational mapping, because the priority for me is the art making, the artist. We can talk about whatever we want, but until we're in the room together, evolving what we're going to be together, evolving what are our stories and what is the story that we want to tell together. To me, that's all. It's a wonderful exercise, right? That might support the process together. So saying that as we're just at the verge of returning to some of our programs. Now, I know that these programs are going to be different, and I don't want to put a name to what that is because, like I said, I want it to evolve from our time together. But I know in my gut, I can feel, like when you can feel it in your body. We say as humans, I feel it in my gut, I feel it in my body that there is a change coming, or that there's a change of foot, that all of this decomposition time is leading to something different. And I don't want to name it yet because I want to let it become what it wants to become. But in that reflection time, I think you'll be hearing from a lot of artists, especially people who are leaders, that, we've been putting the vision, the company, the group, the people, I'll say I have, that I've been always putting them in front. I've been always like, if someone's coming to me with an opportunity, like, oh, can I try to bring others in? And so there's a service that's there. There's a constant cultivation of like the light that shines on me. How can I get it to bounce onto others? That I feel is, part of, as an older artist, that to be able to take relationships and opportunities to create, like I said, that dandelion, to make up, I keep using the word opportunity. I'm kind of getting tired of that word, but to make creative pathways, paid pathways for others.
If you'd like to learn more about Rulan, please visit uncsa.edu/artrestart. Also, please know I'm always eager to profile artists from every region of the country, so if you know an artist who's shaking up the status quo in your community, won't you please let me know? You can find me on both Instagram and Twitter at PCTalenti. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Keenan Institute for the Arts, thank you for listening.